To conclude this chapter, we'll be having a look at how to create multi-dimensional arrays in JavaScript. So, in JavaScript, we actually don't have a proper sort of syntax for declaring a multi-dimensional array. For example, in programming languages like C++, you have a sort of method where you have a sort of technique, I say, to call a variable to make a two-dimensional variable based on writing out two of these square brackets that indicates a two-dimensional array. However, in JavaScript, there are no real types and no sort of strict rules of type declaration and contents of arrays. So in JavaScript, we have to get a little creative when trying to make a multi-dimensional array. So to do that, we're going to do the following. We're essentially going to make an array of multiple smaller arrays. So we're going to use the multi-line sort of technique of writing an array, and we're going to have multiple arrays as elements. So here I'm making multiple arrays as elements. So our first element is 1, 2. Second element is an array of 2, 3. Third is, I don't know. Actually, this should be 3. Let's make this 0, 1, actually. 0, 1. No, let's make it 1, 2. 1. Whoops. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So as you can see here, I think I said in one of the previous tutorials, you can pretty much have any data type, any sort of data in the array. And that includes other arrays. So here's our array. Just so elements are smaller arrays. And this would be a 2x2 matrix, or 2x2, yeah, 2x2 matrix. And to access these, we just print everything out. So we basically have to use a for loop to access our arrays, if you remember. So we're going to access matrix. Oops, I don't want that. Matrix dot length matrix I. So we're just going to do console log, and in parentheses matrix I. So we're just going to display our matrix, and here we go. As you can see, we got array, but because it shows it's an array. And let's try accessing something like this. Maybe this will work, like in other programming languages. And it does. So let's do that. And you get undefined here because the array max is 3. Goes up to the array max. It only gets the elements at 1, 0. At 0, like 0, 0, 1, 1, and so on. And it's tricky. This can be kind of tricky sometimes, so let's try to even make it even more tricky. So what we're doing here is we're trying to access the elements. So there is no real, you don't write it like this, just so you know. So how would we try to access in both variables inside? Well, we need to actually use a nested for loop. So we need to use nested loops now. So we're gonna have here, I don't know, matrix length, because we're going matrix. It's a 2 by, what is it? It's a 2 by matrix I length. And we're going to use J here. So what I'm doing here is I'm making a nested loop to access the outer array, and the inner loop's going to access the inner elements of the array. So this is one application of multi-dimensional, of nested loops. So console log matrix I at element J. Let's see if this works. Oh, forgot here, J. and you get every single element one by one. So what I'm doing here is, let me explain. So the outer loop is in multi-dimensional arrays, specifically in matrices, is used to access the entire array. So we're going from this one, the loop iterates from this line to this line to the next line and so on. And the inner loop is going to access each element inside each line. So while we're at this line, the first array, the 1 and 2 are going to be accessed. So that's how nested loops kind of work. You're looping inside a loop. So here's our big loop, and inside we have a bunch of smaller loops because we have a bunch of smaller arrays. So we have to go iterate an array within an array. And that's why we use nested for loops. You wouldn't use a nested while loop or a nested do while loop because, well, here we know the size of the arrays. Matrix length and matrix J length. Actually, it should be matrix I length to be more specific. And that works. So it accessed all the elements and it displayed them properly. So, and here one more thing is we can actually access the array here, the inner arrays here, because we know already beforehand that we're dealing with arrays. This wouldn't yield anything if these weren't arrays themselves. These would yield some sort of error, or these would have to be strings because strings are essentially arrays of characters. But this is one of the pitfalls you should look out for based on the lenience of JavaScript. Because here in JavaScript, we don't define what type of arguments are. So matrix might be something else. It doesn't have to be an array, have arrays in it. So let's just put a number here. You might get some sort of weird result. See, you don't even display 1 in this situation because it doesn't have a J like this. So JavaScript will just ignore it. So you got to be really careful. And let's actually put a string here to test as well. See what we get. And you actually get all the elements from test because, well, test is an array of string. A string is an array of characters itself. So it's pretty valid to write when accessing an array to access the string like this is 2 as well. 2 as well. Sorry about that as well. So you got to be really careful when writing your variables out in your loops because JavaScript doesn't know what to expect here. And yeah, so you just gotta keep some oversight on your code. So yeah, to recap, we used 2 for loops to be able to access each and every element inside a multi-dimensional array. We created a multi-dimensional array by creating an array with each element being an array inside it. So each element separated by the commas, remember, and each element is an array itself with more square brackets. So that's how we do that. And when accessing a multi-dimensional array, we need to access each element itself. So we have to call the elements at each index. So the I in this case defines the outer array, so the bigger one. So this would be 0, this would be 1, this would be 2, this would be 3, and this would be 4. And J indicates the elements inside each inner array. So this would be J equals 0, J equals 1, J equals 0, J equals 1, J equals 0, J equals 1. And this is done for each and every array. So that's why we have the outer loop and the inner loop. Outer loop does the iteration on the outside, and the inner loop does all the iterations on the inside. So I hope you got that. I hope that was understandable enough. Just be careful when working with these. Oh, and one more thing. Actually, I should add. If you wanted to make a 3-dimensional array, you would make an array within this array, and then you need another for loop. However, I don't another for loop inside the other for loop, so like a for loopception kind of thing. However, I don't really go beyond a 2-dimensional array, nor do I often never use like three inner loops because that's bad for performance times. It's bad for can make things really slow eventually. So I try to refrain from using more dimensions than 2 in arrays. And oftentimes you don't need to use even 2 multi-dimensional arrays in JavaScript, but I just wanted to show you some applications of for loops and arrays mixed together. So I think I'll stop there. I hope you learned something new from this, and we hope to see you in the next chapter. So see you then.